The FAO reports that world food prices were unchanged in August. The U.S. unemployment rate rises to a near four-year high of 4.3%. And Putin praises the economic team and says the budget deficit can be increased due to low debt. You're watching Q News and this is the Economic Bulletin. I'm Henny Saif and we begin with the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, which has revealed that the benchmark for world food commodity prices remained largely unchanged in August. The FAO Food Price Index averaged 130.1 points, a minimal change from the revised July level of 130 points. This stability was a result of rising prices for meat, sugar and vegetable oils, which offset declines in cereal and dairy quotations. Despite the flat performance in August, the index is still 6.9% higher than it was in August of 2024, but remains 18.8% below its peak reached in March 2022. In Europe, Der Status has reported that German industrial orders unexpectedly fell for the third consecutive month in July, primarily due to a sharp decline in big-ticket items like aircraft, ships and trains. The overall drop was 2.9% month-over-month. Excluding these large-scale items, new orders actually increased by 0.7%. Orders for large transport equipment alone plunged 38.6%, and electrical equipment orders fell 16.8%. The automotive industry provided some relief with a 6.5% rise in new orders. Both foreign and domestic demand remain weak, dropping 3.1% and 2.5% respectively. The Office for National Statistics has revealed that British retail sales rose more than expected in July, boosted by good weather and the Women's European Football Championship. But annual growth was slower than expected after extensive revisions to previous month's data. Sales volumes in July were up 0.6% from June, but the annual growth rate came in slightly below forecasts at 1.1%. And sales fell 0.6% in the 3 months to July. The Swiss Statistics Office has reported that inflation stayed positive for a third consecutive month, offering reassurance to policymakers as they also evaluate if the economy can weather a jump in the United States tariffs. Data showed that consumer prices rose 0.2% from a year ago in August, matching the increase of the previous month. Additionally, a gauge stripping out volatile elements such as energy climbed 0.7% compared to 0.8% in July. Moving on to the Americas, the Labor Department has revealed that U.S. job growth slowed significantly in August, with only 22,000 non-farm payrolls added, a sharp drop from July's revised gain of 79,000. The unemployment rate rose to a near four-year high of 4.3%. Revisions also showed a loss of 130,000 jobs in June, marking the first decline since December 2020. Over the last 3 months, employment growth has averaged just 29,000 jobs per month, bolstering the case for an interest rate cut by the Federal Reserve. In Latin America, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has announced that her government is considering imposing tariffs on imports from countries that do not have trade agreements with Mexico, including China. She noted that the tariffs would be part of Plan Mexico, an initiative to boost domestic industry amid tariffs imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump on some imports from Mexico. Sheinbaum, however, did not provide details on which products or sectors that could be affected. Closer look at Oceania. Australia has committed to paying the Pacific Island nation of Nauru a total of $2.5 billion Australian dollars in a 30-year deal to host up to 350 deportees. The agreement includes an initial 400 million Australian dollar payment to establish an endowment fund and an annual 70 million Australian dollars that was made possible by a new Australian law that allows for faster deportation of non-citizens. The law is specifically aimed at people who have had their visas revoked due to criminal convictions, many of whom were previously released from indefinite detention after a 2023 High Court ruling. And for an insight, we are joined from Paris by the director of the EU ASEAN Centre and former World Bank advisor, Mr. Meher Nicholas Fursley. Mr. Fursley, welcome to the Q News Economic Bulletin. How might the $2.5 billion Australian dollar financial deal between Australia and Nauru impact Nauru's local economy and infrastructure development in the short and long term?
So Nauru is a small country, right? So it's a sizable amount of money, even though the amount is spread over a very long period. So I think it's spread over a period of 20 or 25 years. It's still a lot of money for a confetti state, like a tiny little state. And in a way, the fact that the money is spread is actually quite good, because infrastructure investment is usually done over long-term cycles. So when you're building a huge, airport, port, train station, public transport infrastructure, just to build it will take you 6, 7, 8, 10 years. So having the money coming piecemeal to you every quarter or every year, as opposed to one big lump sum, is actually better in most emerging markets where the risk of corruption is fairly high. So having the money coming regularly and funding directly social and transportation infrastructure projects is good. It's good money. It's good money. The problem is the optics. The political optics doesn't look good because Prime Minister Albanese initially comes from the left wing of the Labour Party, right? And so for many years, he campaigned and spoke along very different lines, and he accused the previous, sort of conservative liberal governments of, being xenophobic, racist, and mistreating immigrants. And the problem is also on another layer. It's a legal problem because basically, we use it now. In English law or Anglo-Saxon law, we use the word expediency, which is based on medieval Anglo-French law, to make a long story short. And what is expediency? It is the complete opposite of due process. So due process is the foundation of, Western civilization in a way, and democracy. It means even if you're a foreigner, even if you're an immigrant, even if you're an illegal alien, the justice system will treat you fairly, and they will hear your case before potentially expelling you and deporting you. And people like George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Tony Blair, they said, we don't care about due process because of exceptional circumstances. We can throw democracy in the trash can and the legal process with it. And the left, the Australian left, the French left, the American left, the Democrats, they always said, oh no, that is disgusting, that is totalitarian, that is blah, blah, blah. And it's quite remarkable to see center left policymakers like Anthony Albanese in Australia adopting these measures, which were until recently perceived as hard right, very right wing measures.
Mm-hmm. Well, then, how could these measures, Australia's accelerated deportation policy, affect its own economic and diplomatic relations within the Pacific region and the international human rights bodies?
So here, the relationship with these confetti, tiny confetti islands between, Singapore and Malaysia to the north and Australia to the south, these tens of, states, they're small, and most of them are small, right? And so when you're small and poor, when you negotiate as a government with Australia or China, you don't negotiate on the same plane, right? It's not like it's a fiction to say that, when the prime minister of Vanuatu or Nauru meets the prime minister of China and Australia, they have cordial discussions. It's a fiction. So, of course, one of the parties is very, very strong, very, very rich and powerful, and the other party is microscopic, a small statelets surrounded by water in the Pacific Ocean. So what I'm coming at, the balance of power is not in their hand. So basically, they would accept whatever Australia tells them. Now, of course, if Australia is too harsh with them, because in a way, they're using them as dumping ground, right? So, let's say that you have, Indonesian, right? Indonesian, Malaysian, Pakistani, Indian illegal immigrants. And instead of sending them back to Yemen or Pakistan, you dump them into the Pacific Islands like Nauru. So you're just throwing them as if you were throwing paper in a trash can. The optics is not nice. And it's also a way of telling the people and the governments of the Pacific states that, we don't regard you as equals, and we're treating you like a dumping ground, and it's not nice. So the long-term, psychological, cultural consequences will be negative. But I think in terms of politics, the balance of power is in Australia's favor, and they're putting money. So to as a lubricant, money is the ultimate lubricant of difficult policies. And so to lubricate that difficult, policy, they're putting money on the table so that the government in Nauru, being poor, they'll be happy to have extra money.
Mm-hmm. So if they are putting money on the table, can you elaborate more on the economic then consequences that might the reduced procedural fairness for deportees that have on Australia's immigration system, efficiency and costs?
Yeah, so for the Australians, it's a good deal, right? Because the cost of living in Australia is very high. It's a rich country. So if you want to abide by the rule to the letter of the law, if you want to give, fair and due process to each and every illegal immigrant, what does it mean if you're Australia? It means, putting them in hotels until their case is heard properly by a judge. It could be a provincial, state-level judge. And then if they're not happy with the result, they can appeal. And then they get to another federal national court. So the process for every individual can take up to 4 or 5 years if they had good lawyers. And they often have good lawyers working for them pro bono, for free. So if you add the hotel bills, etc., it's a lot of money. So if you do the math, how much would it cost to Australia to offer due process to each and every illegal immigrant coming in from Malaysia or Pakistan or wherever? And if you do the math of that cost, and you compare it to the money they will give to Nauru over 25 or 30 years, It's a great deal. It's a great deal for the Australian government because they will save a lot of money. And it's an okay deal for Nauru within limits. What are the limits? It's a small Pacific island. So if if the Australians are dumping 2,000, 3,000 illegal immigrants who will be held in what we have to call camps, right? Maybe comfortable concentration camps, but camps, right? If you just throw 2,000 per year onto Nauru and who will keep them in these camps, it's okay, kind of. But if you start throwing and deporting 10,000 or 12,000 a year to a small Pacific island like Nauru, then it's not okay because the cost to Nauru will spiral out of control. And demographically, you risk destabilizing a small state like Nauru.
From Paris, that was the director of the EU ASEAN Centre and former World Bank advisor, Mr. Maher Nicholas Fursley. Mr. Fursley, thank you for being with us on the Economic Bulletin. Now we move on to the latest developments in the Russian economy. During the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, Russian President Vladimir Putin has stated that the nation's economic authorities are prioritizing sustainable macroeconomic policy to support future growth. He defended Russia's financial institutions, noting their professional approach and stable policies have yielded positive results over the past 15 years and will continue to do so. Putin explained that Russia's rising budget expenditures are due to increased spending on infrastructure projects, as well as on education, healthcare, and defense, including the special military operation. He also reaffirmed that the country's budget deficit is not a concern, as Russia's debt burden remains low and acceptable. Additionally, President Vladimir Putin denied that the country's economy was stagnating. He attributed this view to dissatisfaction with the high interest rates, which he defended as necessary for combating inflation. Putin added that the central bank's professionalism is highly regarded by the international financial community.
Инфляция подросла. Нам нужно решать проблемы макроэкономического характера. А для этого нужно обеспечить такую мягкую, спокойную посадку экономики, чтобы обеспечить макроэкономические показатели, затормозить рост цен. Значит, некоторые считают, что уже переохлаждение какое-то наступило. Но кредитование-то не остановилось. Гурьева спросите, остановилось кредитование или нет? Нет. Темпы снизились. Знаю, в некоторых отраслях там ситуация непростая. И здесь сидящие люди тоже прекрасно понимают. Значит, но все также понимают, что если инфляция будет захлестывать экономику, ничего хорошего не будет, потому что невозможно ничего прогнозировать даже на 10 дней, не то что на годы вперед.
And on the country's resources, President Vladimir Putin has called for the development of advanced technologies for enriching rare and earth metal ores and for stimulating domestic demand for them. He requested that the government approve a long-term plan for the rare earth industry no later than November of this year, a plan that was first agreed upon 6 months ago. Putin also stated that a new unified preferential regime will be launched to provide benefits to investors in any Far Eastern or Arctic region. He emphasized that the conditions for current investors in territories of advanced development will be preserved, so no one should be concerned about sudden changes. However, on Russian intercontinental relations, President Vladimir Putin has praised the nation's long-standing cooperation with China. stating that the relationship is driven by mutual national interests rather than current events. He highlighted that the two countries' economies are complementary and that they share common interests and values. Putin also described the planned new Power of Siberia to gas pipeline with China as one of the world's largest energy projects. He noted that the project is mutually beneficial and that its market-based pricing uses the same formula as that for deliveries to Europe. Putin also congratulated Gazprom and its Chinese partners for their perseverance in securing the deal. President Vladimir Putin stated that Russia is open to working with the United States in Alaska and the Arctic, but that a political decision from Washington is needed to move forward. Putin noted that while the U.S. has significant resources in Alaska, Russia has more efficient technology for gas and oil extraction. He said that many U.S. companies are interested in collaborating, but that this cooperation depends on U.S. political leaders. The Russian leader also mentioned that trilateral cooperation with China on gas and oil fields in the Arctic is being discussed, with these mutually beneficial options currently on the table.
Just go up.
And for more on this, we're joined from Moscow by the former advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin, Mr. Sergei Markov. Mr. Markov, welcome to the Qnews Economic Bulletin. How significant is the development of Russia's rare earth metals industry for this economic diversification and global technology competitiveness?
I think most important is that Russia very well defend its economy from anti-Russian sanctions. Sanctions against Russia from United States of America and from European countries and from their allies, tremendous. It's never happened in the history of mankind. But nevertheless, Russian economy in a very good condition. Look, the previous 2 years, economic growth of Russian economy is 3.5%, economic growth of European Union 1%, economic growth of United States of America 2.5%. So Russian economy is very good conditions, but nevertheless it has some inflation signals. That's why Russian government policy now is including very high interest rate, which create a lot of problem for business because it's difficult to take credit for the business. Same time, I want to say that Russian economy is in fact divided on two parts. One part, it's most civil economy. It has problems because of this high interest rate of central bank. On the other hand, those part of Russian economy who is connected to military industrial complex does not have such kind of problems because they get money from government by special program and with very low interest rate. That's why military industrial complex now play a role of the driving engine of whole Russian economy. And all Russian business try to be part of this big military industrial complex development.
Mm-hmm. What about the economic impacts? What economic impacts can be expected from a proposed unified preferential regime for investors in Russia's Far Eastern and Arctic regions?
This is not a play, it will also a big role. It's more simplifying of the economic conditions. In fact, Russian government tried to encourage economic growth in the regions, which is depressive because, first of all, geographical reasons. And that's why Russian government giving them different preferences in by different decisions. As a result, these different regions, it's something about 20 regions among Russians, generally 90 regions. 20 regions of them have special preferences, and it's make a little bit difficult that in every these 20 regions they have a specific characteristic of such privileges. And now Vladimir Putin suggested, let's simplify conditions for the business. Let's make these subsidies and privilege conditions more or less equal for those approximately 20 regions.
Mm-hmm. The infrastructure and defense spending play in Russia's broader economic growth strategy under the current fiscal conditions. How sustainable can it be?
Of course, and when investment go to the military industrial complex, it's play a very big driving role for the development of whole economy on one hand. On another hand, if we expect that war will be finished, it can create some problems for such economy. Mm-hmm. On one, this problem exists, of course, and government keep this problem in the mind for the probably nearest future. But on another hand, now, for example, such a military-industrial complex which produce drones. In fact, they produce drones for the battlefield. But this part of this sector of economy can be moved to the producing of the drones for the civilians, just for normal people, just for the civilian part of economy. So it means that this reconstruction of the military industrial complex can happen. Another very important thing is localization of high tech. In the past, when Russia trust to the Western countries, Russian business suggested that probably Russia will buy any high-tech technologies which some of the business need. Now, because Russia has a lot of limitations for doing cooperation with Western countries, Russia decided to move high-tech technologies to the local economy, so-called localization. And now it has a quite good result because of military-industrial complex.
Yes.
So military-industrial complex not only giving a back to economy, but also developing high-tech technologies with very good speed.
From Moscow, that was the former advisor to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, Mr. Sergei Markov. Mr. Markov, thank you very much for joining us. We move on to the latest developments in the commodities sector. Gold's powerful rally took on fresh legs on Friday, with prices hitting a record high and getting closer to $3,600 per ounce, as weak U.S. jobs data further raised expectations for a bullion-supportive Federal Reserve rate cuts. Spot gold was up 1.4% at $3,596.49 an ounce, having hit a record $3,596.76 earlier. U.S. gold futures for December delivery rose 1.3% to $3,653.3. The metal is now on track for its strongest weekly gain in nearly 4 months. These are all the financial and economic news we have for now, but here is a reminder of the main stories we've been covering. The FAO reports that the world food prices were unchanged in August. The U.S. unemployment rate rises to a near 4-year high of 4.3%. And Putin praises the economic team, and he says that the budget deficit can be increased due to low debt. This concludes our economic bulletin, but please don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at Q News if you want to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.